This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Spencer Duquette, Centerville, Massachusetts.
All right, Mr. Duquette. So, what was it like growing up on Cape Cod?
It was all right. When I grew up in the time frame that I spent around here as a kid, it was kind of boring, and I think that's one of the real reasons why I joined the military is to kind of get more experience across the bridge. We had a little bit more freedom back then, so it was nice. It was a nice time to grow up around here, but it's definitely changed since living here last.
Where did you go to high school?
Nauset High School.
What did you like to do growing up?
I was really big into motorcycles, working on motorcycles, and I played lacrosse for Nauset. I was part of the first Nauset boys lacrosse team, so I really enjoyed doing that.
How did your upbringing influence your decision to enlist?
I had family members that served in the military in Korea and in Vietnam. And I always knew growing up that I always wanted to be a police officer. I always wanted to do something that had to do, be part of something bigger than yourself. I knew I wanted to protect people in some manner, so I kind of just ended up gravitating towards the military.
How did your family feel when you told them that you were going to serve?
They were surprised. When I joined, the invasion of Iraq happened in 2003. I joined I started talking about in 2004 about joining, and I joined in 2005. So they were worried because I chose to join the infantry, which isn't the, it's the front line. So, they weren't too happy, but I think they're pretty proud of me now for everything I accomplished.
Explain what you needed to do to prepare for the war.
So, my situation was kind of weird. I went to Fort Benning, Georgia. I went through boot camp. I graduated in May. I reported to my unit in Fort Hood, Texas in June, and I was in Iraq by August. So it was really all I had as far as training was boot camp. I had a month in Texas and then left for Iraq. So I had just the training I just received as a brand new 19-year-old going overseas. Can't really prepare yourself for that, like from what happened from there on. So it's a lot of mental stuff that you don't know until you get there.
So what made you decide to join the Frontlines, like you said?
Join the infantry?
Yeah.
Honestly, I was looking on the Go Army website when I was a kid, and the first thing that popped up was the most needed MOSs, which are jobs, the most needed jobs in the Army at that time. And the first thing that popped up was the infantry, and so I was like, you know what, that's perfect. I'll join the infantry. I knew I wanted to make a difference, and I knew that being in the infantry, I could do that. So, and I always, growing up, playing soldier, you always want to be the little guy running around with a gun and everything. And it just appealed to me. So,
what was boot camp like?
Boot camp was it was an experience. Coming from a place like the Cape where it's very kind of secluded and not a whole lot happens around here, and then going down to the sands of Fort Benning, Georgia, and you're exposed with all these different people from all over, the United States, and different cultures and different backgrounds. It really exposed me to just how other people act from other places. That's when you really start learning about togetherness and brotherhood and everything, because we knew the war had already started. We knew we were going overseas, so it was hard, as it should be, but it definitely played a key role into the success that we have overseas. It's changed now, I think, a lot since I've gone through. It's a little bit easier, I think.
What did you do for work before the war?
I worked at So I worked at the only skate park when I was a kid, when it first opened. Back when when Jean Finch first started it, she was like my direct boss. I think I was like 15 when I worked there, and then I was a caddy at Cape Cod National Golf Course for about 2 summers.
So, what motivated you to endure through the hardships of war?
So, like, what motivated me as far as like after or like during?
While you're in the middle of all this.
Just the guys to my right and left. We're very close knit group. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, so I spent just over 3 years total in the Middle East. So I worked with a lot of different teams, and those guys are everything to you. You get on a team and you're all strangers, but you're willing to go above and beyond for that stranger. I've witnessed that on multiple occasions, and that's what's motivating. Just getting the job done, getting everyone home safe. It's like the biggest thing.
How did it feel when your brothers, were called on to their first mission?
So as I progressed in the military, you get higher rank and you get put in charge of teams, and it's a very strong responsibility to carry, because you're now in charge of these 19-year-old, 20-year-old kids that haven't been to war before, and to like bring them, to take them from the States and train them as best as you can, and then to bring them overseas, where you bring them to a combat zone and you give them a gun and you teach them everything. You go over everything, as best as you can, and as soon as that first round is fired, every plane goes out the window. So, you can only prepare as much as you can until something happens, and then it's all just up in the air at that point. You're relying on your training as an individual. You're relying on your guy to your left and your right, but it's a heavy thing to handle, and I feel like a lot of guys, get put in that position and aren't aware of those kind of responsibilities. Experiences may vary, kind of, depending on your job, but being a trigger puller on the front lines and like having a team is a pretty serious thing.
Mm-hmm. So we've heard a lot about this team that you developed such a good bond with, but who were these people that you served with? What were they like?
So every platoon has its characters. So it's kind of just like a sitcom. You know what I mean? You have the barber. The guy that every team somehow has a guy that can cut hair. You have the funny guy. Everyone has a thing. I've been fortunate to work with like some really good guys, and I've been a part of multiple teams. So like to talk about my best team was probably my first deployment, where I was a lower enlisted guy on that team, and I was the machine gunner for them. So they were, it was a weird dynamic of the team. I was the only infantryman on the team, and the other guys were interrogators. So I was the personal security for them. So whenever we went out on a mission, I was their machine gunner. I was the guy in the room doing interrogations, like standing off into the corner, just making sure that they're protected. That team was probably my best team because we went through the most stuff together. That was when the war was still really hot. It was kind of like the Wild West over there. Things were still blowing up. And we worked a lot with the local national military there, the Iraqi army. And they were always getting us in trouble. So that I feel like I grew a lot from that team and during that deployment. And because of that team, it made me a success later on down the road.
So what was your rank?
I got out as a sergeant.
How did you stay in contact with loved ones?
First deployment, I lived on an Iraqi army base. We didn't have great communication back to the States. It actually got to the point where I feel like the Army felt bad for us, so they sent us out a satellite dish and hooked up just a comm line that you can call back to. Internet was kind of sporadic. You couldn't rely on it. You couldn't do any video. You couldn't handle that. So just emails and like short phone calls. We would take a convoy like once a month to a U.S. base that was nearby that had like they called it MWR, morale, recreation place that guys could go and like use the internet and call home and stuff. But after that, it wasn't that bad. As the war progressed, things started getting built. You could get internet in your tents at that point. There was like a Wi-Fi setup over there. But I never had the luxury of living on an actual U.S. base each time I deployed. I always lived on a little crappy base that was on the border somewhere. So I never lived in like, Baghdad, where they call the green zone, which has like swimming pools and like, yeah, it's ridiculous. So I never had that luxury, but I mean, I enjoy the fact that I never had that luxury because I actually feel like I had a hardship, time over there, and it made all of us closer because we're all going through the same issues.
So, what was it like in Iraq? We hear about the differences between the bases and stuff, but what was it like actually living there?
So living on the Iraqi Army base, my first deployment, was probably the best because we lived in old Iraqi Army buildings that once we were the first U.S. presence there, and so once we got there onto that base, we kind of made it our own. We had a little compound inside this massive training base for the Iraqi Army, and it was just cool because I always thought that this was what deployment every time was going to be like. We had to like set up fighting positions on top of the roof, in case the base got overthrown, or just learning the ropes over there on that base was awesome because it was a small compound. There was only about 30 U.S. soldiers that lived on it, and I lived there for 15 months, and that was home. When you switch countries, so like my second deployment to Iraq, I ended up living on a little bit bigger of a base, but still off like it's still considered a small base. It wasn't like Baghdad or Mosul, but it was, the living situation started to improve. They started building these things called chews, which are basically container housing unit. So it's like a big metal box with an AC in it with bunk beds, and then it was better than living in tents. I mean, I enjoyed it.
How did you spend your free time while deployed?
My free time. So my first deployment did a lot of working out until I got injured. And then after that, just hanging out with the team, when you have downtime, depending on your missions, you sleep a lot, you catch up, you just kind of like to chill out as best as you can.
So what was your proudest moment during your service?
Proudest moment. I would probably say, I mean, the only thing that always sticks out in my head when someone asks me about what moment, do you cherish the most, or what moment, do you hate to think about, it's the same moment. It's the moment that I was injured. But the way I got injured, I was helping people while I got injured. So I was helping people that are in immediate danger. I got hurt myself, but it was okay because I lived and they lived. So it was the first ever time that I was in a position to fire my weapon overseas, and I was protecting the Iraqi army and our guys that were on the ground, and we started taking heavy fire from the village, and I was laying down rounds, but I was scared because it was the first time. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, because when you're over there, you're like, okay, am I allowed to fire my weapon right now? Because you're always afraid that something bad's going to happen, or like they're going to take legal action on you, or this doesn't feel right because am I really allowed to shoot this gun right now at this house? And so, but in the end, even though I got shot, everyone who I was with there at the immediate time was still alive. We did end up losing a guy that day, Staff Sergeant Doria, Richwell Doria, and that was kind of an example of you know, when you have guys to your left and your right, Staff Sergeant Doria didn't know who I was, you know, but he was there with his team to get us out of a situation because we weren't equipped enough to fight in that fight. His team came in, and you know, he ended up getting killed for us, and he didn't even know us, you know. So it's one of those things that really bears heavy on you when you think about it.
Describe how you prepared for a mission.
A lot of briefings, a lot of checking loads, you know, talking to your guys, making sure that mindset's correct, making sure they know what the task at hand is, making sure the vehicles are set, weapon systems are clean, reviewing rules of engagement. It's a long process, but it gets down to a routine after you do a couple hundred of them.
What was the food like?
So like my experiences, as you could tell, like talking about the different bases, like they changed drastically from my first deployment to my second deployment. So like first deployment 2006, living on the Iraqi Army base, we lived off of MREs, whatever the local National Army was cooking at their DFAC, which was really weird chicken and rice. And then the Army sent us out these weird things that were just like boil and bag meals because we didn't have a set up kitchen facility. So we had like a hot plate in a huge metal pot, and we'd have like these things we used to call them beef blocks. I think it was like supposed to be like pot roast, but it was literally like 15 blocks of beef in a bag that you boil, and like that was it. So but you know, as time goes on, like I said, things get built up, experiences change over the years. You deploy, you start getting like real like DFAC food or whatever. But that first deployment, like everything was kind of like barbaric for us. It was all like new. Like we didn't have that much communication with back here. We didn't have the food that other people had. I remember like going to the U.S. base. We'd always go straight to the DFAC. We just wanted to like eat whatever they had for snacks, and everyone was like, "Who are these weird guys like coming in? Like we're all dirty and like we definitely didn't look like the other people that lived on that base."
So let's go back to your injury. Did you have to go home after you were injured? What happened?
I got shot in my left arm, and I took shrapnel to my face and throat. I had my throat cut open from just underneath my jawline, and then I had a round go through my left arm. And what ended up happening was I didn't get extracted until an hour after I got shot. They actually, funny story, they forgot about me because I was still in my turret. I was still manning my gun. They didn't know that I was injured until my driver, who was also a private at the time, just happened to say something over the radio that when they saw the medical helicopters come in, him and I were talking in the truck. And he was like, "You should probably get on that." And I was like, "Yeah," but I didn't know, like I didn't have any supervision around. I'm a 19-year-old kid who had just been shot like an hour before, but adrenaline, you know, things are still happening in front of me. I eventually got pulled out by a lieutenant, and he pulled me out really aggressively. I'll never forget that. He grabbed me by both my ankles and basically just yanked me from the turret without any. I didn't have any idea he was going to do that. And I'll never forget that either. And he finally ran me over to the helicopter. But I was still ready. Like, there were still guys in danger. There was a lot of stuff going on. Adrenaline took over. We got medevaced out with a couple other guys got injured. I was in charge of one Iraqi Army guy who got shot through the clavicle right by his neck. And there's actually a pretty cool photo of me holding him, taking him to the helicopter, because whatever Iraqi Army soldier was injured, if there was an American soldier too that could help them with like getting him on the helicopter and looking after him, then we were assigned like an injured Iraqi Army guy. So I had a guy that, you know, I had to get into the helicopter, and I'm like bleeding too. We're both bleeding. It was a weird scenario just because, you know, I was young and I'd never experienced this before. It was my first firefight, first time I ever shot a weapon. I got to see everything from the enemy being killed to, unfortunately, one of us being killed. Both sides being injured. Taking a helicopter ride out off the mission. It was a lot of firsts for that day, and that's why I say that, you know, it was the good and the bad. Like, a lot of good came out of it, but a lot of bad came out of it as well. So,
what was it like to have to take an Iraqi soldier you were just shooting at on your side and have to?
Oh, no. This was a counterpart of ours. So, the Iraqi Army worked with us. So,
sorry, I'm really
yeah. So they're the ones that actually got us into trouble. We started on one side of the village. We knew something was kind of weird because the kids usually come up to the trucks and they want like soccer balls or candy or something from us, and we kind of knew something was weird because none of them were around our trucks. And we were just at this village to get a simple GPS coordinate and talk to the local nationals who were in charge of that village. And so the Iraqi Army moved to one side of the village, and we started hearing gunshots. And so we like followed them there. And we show up, and they're all like behind like a rock wall that's getting like, you know, pinned by AK fire. So we had to bail them out. We ended up being there for like almost 3 hours before Quick Reaction Force QRF showed up with Staff Sergeant Doria's team to help us bail out because we didn't have the right explosives to pull back or anything like that. We were pretty pinned.
What is Quick URS? What you were just saying?
QRF.
Yeah.
Quick Reaction Force.
Quick Reaction Force. Could you explain that?
Yep. So whenever you have a unit that's outside the wire, that means like out off base conducting a mission. If they're in dire need or in trouble where they're not fit enough to fight, whether they're either out of ammunition or don't have enough guys to either pull back or suppress the fire, they'll send in QRF teams. Either it'll be by air or by land. Either they'll go out in trucks or they'll get inserted by a helicopter. And so Staff Sergeant Doherty's team got inserted by helicopter. There was 2 Blackhawks that touched down around the same time.
And what's a Blackhawk?
UH-60 Black. It's a helicopter. Yep. So roughly two teams of 6 or 8 guys will get dropped, and there'll be reinforcements. Basically, use your reinforcement. They'll bring ammo. They'll bring whatever you request over the radio. So at that day, we didn't have any grenades left after a certain point, and because we never thought we were going to need so many grenades, rocket launchers, stuff like that. So every mission after that happened, every gunner ended up getting an AT-4, which is a rocket launcher on the back of their turret after that instance. So
what was the range of ages in your squad, and like what was it like having those different ages?
And we were between 18 and like mid-20s. So like we didn't like, so that's as far as like, you know, like a sergeant or a staff sergeant could be as young as 24 years old. So it's kind of funny to look back on it now when I meet like a 24-year-old like back here, and I'm like, you know, when I was 19, like my squad leader was like 24 years old. And like when I meet a guy now, I'm 32 now, and when I meet a 24-year-old, it's like I can't imagine like a guy like this was in charge of, you know, guys like me back then, you know. And of course, like, you know, not every 24-year-old can do that. You know, it's something that grows within being in the military. But it's not as big as a range as people may think. I think a lot of people have the misconception that it's like a bunch of older guys with like young privates and stuff, but you know, the captains, I look at my team leader from that first deployment who was in his mid-20s, and the amount of crap that we put him through and stress and everything. It's funny to look back at it now and be like, I can't believe he put up with us and like went through all that stuff with us. But I mean, that's what kind of makes it cool, you know, to look back and be like, I accomplished more by the age of 25 than most people do by the age of 40, you know. It's just an experience.
So how long were you in the Army?
From 2005 to 2013.
And what is it like shooting at another human and like knowing that there's a chance that you're going to take someone's life?
It is very difficult to cope the first time, because when you're young and you know you train for it, you know, for however long, depending on when your time is, from like boot camp to like training at base to like going overseas. Mine was relatively quick. Like I went through the process super quick. And being in the infantry, it's just what's expected of you, you know, to protect. So you always feel like you're gonna get in trouble. Like that first time, you're like, am I allowed to do this? Like, where am I supposed to be shooting? If a guy's like for instance, the first time I had a guy that was running between buildings. And, is that the same guy that was running over there? Is that the, so like all these things are running through your head, and probably so many things you think of, and like you think probably time is going really slow, but it's like, you think of these things so fast, you go through everything, and then you start remembering your rules of engagement, and everything, and like I said earlier, it all goes out the window as far as the planning until that first round is fired, because rounds change direction, situations change, terrain changes, the ground commander might want you to put the vehicle this way. There's a lot of stuff going on the radio that you have a headset on, a lot of yelling is going on. You have to make sure that you're not going to shoot at any guy that's on the ground if you're up in a truck. So it's a very difficult thing to comprehend when you're 19. It's your first time, but you do what you have to do. It's a job. So,
did you have an expectation for shooting at somebody? Was that met, or was it a lot different than what you thought?
I thought that I was going to be able to just treat it as a target rather than a human, I guess would be the best way to put it. Thinking of it as a moving target, or a target in general, as a training silhouette like you would at a range. Unfortunately, that's like not the case. That person's still a human, whether whatever we have going on or whatever. It's still a human. It's very weird the first time. So that's kind of like the lessons that you have to experience in that line of duty, in that job, to be able to explain to guys later on in your career, like, that are going to go through the same process. So unfortunately, it's a process of learning.
What were your uniforms like?
Uniforms. I had standard uniforms. I mean, I had combat boots. I had a couple different camouflage uniforms, just because the different wars have different uniforms and different colors, but they weren't bad.
If I said I was going to join the military, what advice would you have to give me?
Go to college first. Go to college, become an officer. A lot of guys, they just join like I joined. Like they join up. They really don't know any idea of the military. Just like myself, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was probably an idiot for joining the infantry. Anyone who wants to join now, I'd always say, even I have a son now, I would tell him, if he wants to join the military, go to college first, do ROTC, go into an officer program. So that way you get an education and you can make an educated choice on what you want to do rather than just jump into it. And that way, you go in as an officer, it's better pay. You're not out there risking your life, and I think it's just a better move, a smarter move in the long run.
When I say the words Iraq and Iran, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
So, Iraq, a lot of things come to mind because I spent 27 months there. As soon as I hear Iraq, Iran, bordering countries, I think of, it's kind of a funny story. April 1st, I think it was 2011, on April Fool's Day, we got blown up on the border, just north of Mosul, and that was up at a border point, and I thought it was weird that we would get blown up on April Fool's Day. I don't know why, but it's something I always remember now. And then my son was born on April Fool's Day, April 1st. So it's just kind of a weird, like, full circle thing. So I just think bordering countries, and then I think of that day at that traffic circle. They planted a bomb while we were in the border compound. That's the compound that we would stage guys that catch foreign fighters that were crossing over into the country, or smugglers. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
What was readjustment like after coming home?
Very difficult. coming back to the Cape, it's a long. I didn't think it was as long as a process as I thought it would be. I know that experiences differ with people and what they experienced and what they have going on back here. I think that if you don't have something set up for yourself and you just let your mind wander, it can be a very long, daunting process. My first year and a half back here was pretty bad. A lot of guys like just start drinking and whatnot, and the party, just let the party go. You get out, you think, okay, that chapter's done, but there's no real like closure. The army and the military, I think, is really great at preparing you for war. They're not really great at preparing you to get out. So like they'll train you and they'll spend all this money on getting you combat fit, getting you combat ready, giving you the best equipment they can, and then when it's time for you to leave them, it's like, okay, see ya. Especially on the Cape, there's not a whole lot of outreach and programs, so I feel like that's one big thing that's missing from around here. But it's a process, and I'm happy to say now, like I quit drinking almost 3.5 years ago, and that was a big step into the right direction. Had my son, was able to buy a house. Things kind of just took a turn once I started realizing what my issues were and what I was dealing with. It all came to a head and kind of has set me up for success, both in my life and in my work life and everything. So,
what was it like the day you came home?
The day I came home, came home from deployment, or came back here after getting out?
Came back here after.
Came back here. It was a party. In that part, that's what I warn people about. That party sometimes can last a year. You just want to always keep going out, drinking. See, it's like a high school reunion that lasts like a year, because when I left here, I would just visit for like a week, a year, and then go back to Texas, or I'd be deployed, or I'd be going back overseas. So just constantly like drinking and partying, and you can kind of let yourself get lost in that, and you kind of never get back until you kind of have that serious conversation with yourself and look around and like, I can't do this forever.
Explain the most important thing you learned during the war.
The most important thing I learned is I would say to really cherish those relationships that you have with those guys. It's something I'm guilty of not doing to the fullest these days, and I've actually started recognizing that lately. But like what I talked about earlier, with just like being kind to people, because like I've been in situations like with Staff Sergeant Doria, he didn't know who I was, but he gave his life that day. I think we can all do a lot better at giving back to individuals who we don't even know, and I try to do that now. I work with an organization here on the Cape called Cape Cod Cares for the Troops, and just came back from a trip from Virginia where we helped 57 wounded warrior families with Christmas that were in financial distress. And so I took my vacation days to go down there and help those families out, and I feel like just giving back more and being a little bit more understanding to other people's situations, I think, is the most valuable thing I learned.
So are you still in contact with all of your squadron members?
Yeah, for the most part. It's a lot easier nowadays with social media. That's pretty easy. None of them live around here. Most of the guys, you'll find out, like, most of the guys, it seems like, are from Texas or California, like the two biggest states. Like, that's where like all the vets come from, or they ended up residing there. I had a lot of friends that were smart and they stayed in Texas. I decided to come back here to this small town. But I don't regret it anymore. I love my life here. I love my job here and everything about it. So,
if you could go back in time, knowing then what you do now, what would you change?
I think everything happens for a reason. So, I've always thought about it as far as like the butterfly effect goes. But there was one instance when I first showed up to my unit. where I was standing in line, and we were all told not to move. And I, of course, being the 19-year-old I am, didn't listen to this guy who, I was just told, he was like a sergeant first class. He was a high-ranking military guy. He was lining us all up at the wall, and like eyes forward, like we were back in boot camp. And I was like, graduated. Like, we're at our unit now. Like, why are we getting yelled at already? We just got here. I saw a buddy of mine that was like 6 people behind me, and so I moved out of the line, and I got behind him so we could talk and catch up. And little did I know that me changing that line, that spot in line, determined what unit we were going to. So literally, he just pointed at the first 3 guys. There were 6 of us in line. Pointed the first 3 and said, "You're going to Bravo Company, and you guys are going to Charlie Company." That's all it was. And so because I moved in line, I switched companies, and therefore I got to work on the teams I got to work for, the experiences I had, the reason why I got shot, all because I moved from one part of the line to the other. But I wouldn't change it. That me changing my spot in line that one time affected my entire military career, because it set me up for all my experiences, all my promotions, everyone I met, everything I learned came from me just changing that one spot. So I think about that a lot.
What skills learned in the military do you still use today?
So right now I am the residential manager at NASA Disposal. I manage a team of guys of sometimes in the summer upwards to 12, 15 guys. We talk about it all the time. My boss gets sick of me saying it when I come up with ideas at work where I pull stuff that I learned in the military, as far as just like small things like supply and like just how we do reviews. I implement that stuff on a regular basis at work. He's always like, "This isn't the military," but they did some things right, and I try to implement what I've learned, the successes of that, into what I do now, and it works out greatly. So,
if you could go back, would you still enlist?
Yep. Yeah, I'll be honest, I was never a great student, so I never saw myself going to college. So I'm glad that I had the opportunity to join, for sure.
All right, I think we're good. Thank you so much.
Are we good? Okay.